The following program paid for by Lifespan Wealth Management. Providing financial advice since 1993. It's time for Your Money with Sherry Goss, Randy Goss, and Jonathan Eisner. And now from the Macon studios of News Talk 940 WMAC, it's Your Money.
Good morning, Middle Georgia, and thanks for tuning in to Your Money, produced by Lifespan Wealth Management. As financial advisors, the main thing we do is provide retirement planning advice and manage our clients' investment accounts. So if you're looking for an investment advisor, call our office at 478-922-8100 to set up your complimentary consultation.
Lifespan Wealth Management has offices in Macon and Warner Robins for your convenience and has been serving Middle Georgia for over 30 years. You can learn more about our services by visiting our website at retirerelax.com. And while you're on our site, go to the special reports section where you'll find several reports that are available to you for free. You can also sign up to receive our digital feeds, which are short videos providing great information relevant to retirement, investing, and matters that affect your money.
We also offer seminars to the community at no cost. So if you're in need of a guest speaker for your church or civic organization, give us a call and together we can decide what topics you would like us to present to your group. Again, our contact number is 478-922-8100.
Good morning, Middle Georgia, and thank you for listening to Your Money. Elephant in the room right out of the gate, guys. The markets this week, they took a beating. And it could go on a little longer. We would encourage you, and we are, what's the word here, Randy? We're
cautious.
We're living this out.
Yes.
We're living out what I'm about to say here because our accounts are down too. We feel the pain, guys, but try not to focus on today. Try not to focus on this week. Try to focus on the long term. The noise you hear today will dissipate and the markets will come back. And there are times when you can't get out of the way fast enough, like April 3rd of this week, for example. The Dow opened, when the market opened at 9:30 a.m., the Dow was already down 1,300 points. The damage had been done, and it ended the day down over 1,600 points. So brutal day on Wednesday, or whatever day that April 3rd was. Panic selling, that just locks in your losses. And try to remain calm. Try to focus on the long term. Markets are resilient, and history proves the strength of the market to return.
That is true.
Yep.
True statement.
So again, guys, we're feeling the pain. We see our accounts, they're down, yours are down. We know what's going on. Let's try to stay the course.
Yep. So how do tariffs work and who will they impact? This is from the University of Chicago. University of Chicago scholars examined Trump's policies and what they could mean for U.S. consumers and the economy. Each day brings news of the Trump administration's shifting trade policy, imposing tariffs one day only to later delay or suspend them the next. On April 2nd, the administration announced sweeping reciprocal tariffs and a 25% tariff on all foreign-made vehicles. Conflicting narratives about who bears the economic brunt of these policies has left many U.S. consumers wondering what Trump's tariffs could mean for their wallets. I talked with a client this week who thought car prices were increasing by 25%, and she said she saw this in the news. So this is a good thing to talk about. We found an article that basically asked the same questions that are on everyone's minds, and we wanted to share this with you.
Yep. The article interviewed 3 leading University of Chicago experts and asked them to break down the basics into 3 broad categories. First category, how do tariffs really work? Second, how do they impact the most? Or who do they impact the most? Third, how's the era of economic uncertainty affecting our relationships around the world? Say first, what are tariffs? What's the economic rationale for implementing them? Tariffs are federal taxes set by Congress and applied to goods at the border. Unlike income or sales taxes, tariffs vary by product and by originating country. Today, most imports to the U.S. have low or no tariffs, but a few have high import tariffs.
Yeah, and tariffs have 3 goals. The first is that, like any tax, tariffs raise funds for the U.S. government. And second, because tariffs only apply to imports, they can be used to redistribute money from customers towards domestic producers. Third, tariffs can affect the global markets, strategically shifting global prices or as a sanction against foreign export firms or exporting countries. But the big question is who really pays for the tariff? If you go back to the trade war of 2018, there is a body of research showing that most of the impact of these tariffs was borne by the consumers and firms inside the United States. But who inside the United States is paying for the tariffs? Well, that is a little more difficult to determine or track, but there is some evidence that the cost is split. Some of it gets paid by the final consumer. Then the rest is borne by those in the middle, that being the importers and the retailers purchasing those goods from the foreign countries and taking them all the way to the source for you. What will the tariffs mean for the consumers? Well, that depends on the product and where it comes from. For example, approximately 60% of the vegetables that we consume come from Mexico, and 25% of the oil processed by the U.S. refineries comes from Canada, and 10% of it comes from Saudi Arabia. And 24% of the clothing sold in the United States is imported from China, and toys, 80%. So, expect an increase in these items, and it will cost more if you purchase brands that are imported.
But could the tariffs be good for U.S. workers and businesses? Part of the argument for tariffs is that they are good for U.S. jobs, with the employment effect being worth the higher prices and harm to consumers. But that's not really how they work. In fact, tariffs are likely to cause negative employment effects because of the way that they ripple through the economy. A good example is the steel tariff implemented in the first Trump administration. Those tariffs slightly raised employment in the steel industry. However, they caused an overall decline in manufacturing employment that was an order of magnitude higher than the modest gain in steel jobs. Why? Because millions of manufacturing jobs involve products that use steel as an input. Over 2 million jobs are in steel-intensive industries. These jobs are adversely impacted by rising production costs caused by tariffs on steel. In contrast, there are fewer than 150,000 U.S. steel workers. I am sure you are already aware that tariff increases do not occur in a vacuum. China has already retaliated. Canada and Mexico previously proposed countermeasures to U.S. threats. The Canada and the European Union have responded to the steel and aluminum tariffs. This is why tariffs are often called a beggar thy neighbor policy. If you've never heard of that saying, it is an economic policy where one country attempts to remedy its economic problems by means that tend to worsen the economic problem of other countries. But in the end, everyone else is worse off.
So, what about the historical precedents for similar tariffs? And what were the outcomes in those cases? Tariffs have been part of the U.S. trade policy since the country's founding, but in the period that tariffs were high, they were consistent and targeted. There is little historical precedent for the sort of rapid experimentation in tariff setting, where tariffs are declared one day and dropped the next or applied to all products from a country. One analogy would be from an 1807 Embargo Act, a ban on all trade intended to punish Britain and France. It had the effect of sharply reducing American imports and exports, allowed British trade expansion in South America, and escalated political tensions, culminating in the War of 1812. How are tariffs or threats of tariffs affecting relationships with U.S. neighbors and trade partners? Some say that any negative impact you would expect from the tariffs being applied to other countries, especially those in Asia, would be much larger if they are applied to your direct neighbors. Not only is there more trade with our close partners, but that trade may be on specific items that are very hard to substitute because they're integrated into those very long supply chains.
Mm-hmm. So the car manufacturing industry is a good example. If you cut Canada from the supply chain in the U.S., you'll have fewer parts for producing cars. Even the parts that were produced in the U.S. are not going to be useful because you don't have the parts that are being produced in Canada. It's not easy for firms to substitute, for example, part of an engine that is only used by Ford on certain models. It will take a few months at least. The evidence that we have is that in the short run, these disruptions can be very severe. And tariffs reduce demand for foreign goods, which can create political challenges in maintaining friendly relations. However, those issues are part of everyday economic relations among even close partners. It may seem that decades of diplomatic effort to negotiate these treaties, build trust, and develop a system to address economic friction has been abandoned, but it could be that the old norms are just being adjusted to a more fair and balanced business model.
And the other thing is this: we talked just last week about the national debt. Remember, guys, and talking in detail about how it's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. In the last 24 years, we run at a deficit, et cetera, et cetera. And we're not pointing fingers here, but nobody's done anything about this except make it worse. And now all of a sudden, here's somebody who's implementing an idea, and like Trump or hate him, he's thinking bigger picture here, where it's like, okay, we can bring revenue in for the government here, for the American government, and help bring this situation that's gotten so out of control under control some. So, anything that can bring revenue. And were you about to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I don't know. It's tough when you're looking at your account in the short run, but the whole point of this thing is, 2018 fourth quarter, same situation. Tariffs, fourth quarter was negative. It was down. It kind of stung if you looked at your accounts. 2019 was an incredible year right after that.
So hang in there.
Hang in.
Hang in.
Hang in.
Yep.
All right. Headlines and stories from this week. AI is making it easier to commit financial crimes. That's exciting. So the IRS is overhauling its tech after finding $21 billion in fraud in just 2 years.
It's about time they overhaul their systems. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Right?
Yeah, fraud's just rampant. It's terrible. Elon Musk and his Doge team says government systems can have an Apple-like experience, and I like this. In case you have not heard, Airbnb co-founder Joe Gebbia has taken a role in Doge. His goal is to digitize government's retirement process, calling the current system an injustice to civil servants who are subjected to this antiquated process. He believes that he can create a system that will be an online digital process that will take just a few days at most versus the old antiquated paper system that could take months to get your retirement process completed. Gebbia highlighted recently that there is a mine in Pennsylvania that houses every paper document for the retirement process in the government. This cave has over 22,000 filing cabinets stacked 10 high to house 400 million pieces of paper. He said, adding that the process started in 1950 and has largely not changed in the last 70 years.
That is so insane.
It is.
I never knew about this.
And he is optimistic that this can lead to a change and revolutionize the system and end up with an Apple-like store experience. Beautifully designed, great user experience, and a modern system. This alone could save millions of dollars a year, not to mention reducing the stress of the civilian employees trying to navigate the retirement process. Digitizing the files alone is long overdue.
So
I was just going to say that, going through any government process can be, like retirement is a very long, I've gone through it, a very long and arduous process. And a lot of times you just find that files are missing because they can't find the paper file to go with it. Having it digitized and spread among multiple servers is a much better way of doing business.
Well, I'm seeing this problem in the VA. So I have clients that should be able to apply for disability, and they can't get on disability because the VA can't find their records because they got lost somewhere. They're probably in a pit like this.
Our son is a good example. He was at a training camp out in California and went to the dental clinic there, and they have no record of him ever going. So it was all done in paper, lost.
Who knows? Who knows where it is?
Yep.
Very frustrating. Anyways, Labor Department announced on Monday that they will return over $1 billion with a B in unused COVID funding back to the Treasury, and that action is being taken to recover the remaining $2.9 billion. According to the press release, roughly $4.3 billion was intended for states to use for temporary unemployment insurance during the pandemic. Instead, several states continued spending millions of dollars despite no longer meeting necessary requirements, which was uncovered in a 2023 audit by the Office of Inspector General. The program was closed in 2021, the department said, but the 2023 audit found 4 states were allowed to access the funding despite not meeting requirements, totaling over $100 million in spending. This is ridiculous. Every week there's something they're finding that is just totally rotten.
Yep.
I love it. Anywho, Doge uncovers VA's agreement to pay $380,000 per month for minor website modifications. This will blow your mind. Doge found that the Department of VA paid $380,000 a month for website changes before canceling the contract and having an internal staffer take over. Good work by @Department Vet Affairs, Doge said in a post on X on Wednesday. VA was previously paying $380,000 a month for minor website modifications. That contract has not been renewed, and the same work is now being executed by one internal VA software engineer spending 10 hours a week. VA Secretary Doug Collins has defended Doge cuts at the VA as part of the new administration's efforts to reform the department and better serve veterans.
I wish we had a button here for applause.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's about time they're fixing some stuff. This is stupid.
That one's saving them a few bucks.
A few.
Almost
Good
400
grief.
grand a month.
Yep.
All right, scam alert for the week. This one happened to me personally. Fortunately, I didn't fall for it. But I got an email stating that I was officially late on my annual report, quote, annual report for my LLC. I got a little side LLC with the state of Georgia, and that now I needed to file the report and pay the $25 late fee. I was a little surprised to get the notice because I was fairly certain. I think, Randy, you and I did this together
We
earlier
did.
this year.
We did.
But we just filed for our LLCs all at the same time and made sure we took care of it. But I was fairly certain I'd already done my 2025. But the email looked legitimate. The website looked legitimate that it took me to. I thought, well, I guess I forgot to do this. In the back of my mind, I was also surprised that I'd not been given some kind of notice, though, before I was all of a sudden overdue on it and owed $25 extra. Anyway, I went to the site, got my credit card out. I was prepared to go through, pay for it, file my registration, etc. And when I got to the checkout, it said the price to file my annual report was $299. And I did not remember ever paying that kind of money to file with the state of Georgia. I thought it was something like $50 or $60. And so I went through my personal documents, found the conference. I should have done this at the beginning. I guess I assumed it was an innocent enough thing. I had forgotten my registration. I was going to go swipe a credit card for $50, whatever. But I went back and dug up out of my personal documents the confirmation that I had indeed filed and paid for my 2025 registration with the state. So I called the Secretary of State to make sure this was not something different that I did indeed owe money for. And the lady told me there, nope, you're confirmed. You paid, you've registered, you are good for 2025. That website that sent you an email is a scam. Steer clear of it. And she also confirmed for me that what I had paid was $55, which sounded more right.
Yeah.
That sounded more correct to me. And I told you guys this week, I was like, geez, if you're going to try to scam people, at least like have a price point that's something close to what they're used to paying.
That's not going to make you go, oh, gee, that's not right.
Right. I would have paid this thing if it had been $50 or $60 and not thought another thing of it until probably somebody was stealing, all my information.
Right.
But since it was $300, it definitely raised a big red flag. So I Googled this. It's apparently more prevalent than I realized with these third parties. The case in point is this. If you have LLCs, don't ever accept from a third party warnings that you're late or that you owe. It's very easy to file it directly with the Secretary of State on their website.
Yep.
So anyway, scam of the week, steer clear. Apparently that more people have probably seen this than I thought, but it happened to me this week.
And I don't think the Secretary of State actually charges you if you're late.
I did look that up. They do.
They do.
It is a $25 fee. So they get you in the door with that.
Okay.
Oh, you're late. You owe $25 extra. And, so that is a thing. But I don't know how you officially just dissolve your LLC without having to pay the $25. I didn't look into that. If you want to just get rid of your LLC because you don't use it anymore, I'm not sure what the process is for that.
So I have an S Corp, and so I get mailings. I don't get emails about it, but I get mailings with fake forms that are telling me I have to send in money every year.
Happens all the time.
And it's just ridiculous. And so you got to be really careful.
Just
you do.
Always go to the Secretary of State's website for any official business.
All right. How investors can ready their portfolios for a recession. Economic forecasters have raised the odds of a U.S. recession to 36% amid an escalating trade war. Investors shouldn't act emotionally if trying to prepare their portfolios for a downturn. Most investors should ignore the impulse to flee for safety by exiting the market. Instead, the best way to brace for an economic shock is by double-checking fundamentals like asset allocation and diversification.
So President Donald Trump hasn't ruled out the possibility of a U.S. recession, and earlier this month said the economy was in a period of transition. Recession isn't assured, though, and the economists generally agree the chances are relatively low. Trying to predict when and if a recession will happen is nearly impossible, and acting on such fear often leads to bad financial decisions. I've met with quite a few clients in the past weeks who feared that their accounts are going down really badly due to the news they are watching. I show them their accounts, and they're actually positive year over year. I will explain what we're invested in and the advice that we are getting from the experts that we follow, and they are so relieved. So be careful about what news you watch, as it can really make you believe things that are much worse than they are. That's because the news thrives on negative stories as they get clicks and eyeballs. I've recommended this before, and I'm telling my clients, look at the Wall Street Journal, ignore the opinion side of the paper, go to our website, retirerelax.com. You can view it for free.
When the economy heads toward a recession, it's natural for investors to worry about falling stock prices and the impact on their portfolio. But investors quite often make bad moves and guess poorly. Selling stocks during a market downturn and missing the rebounds, which is considered emotional investing, is a big reason that investors underperform the broader market. That said, the prospect of a recession is a good time for investors to revisit their portfolios and make small adjustments if necessary. We suggest that investors examine their asset allocation to make sure it's appropriate for their goals and timeline, and to rebalance if their allocations have gotten out of whack. and they might consider diversifying among and within asset classes. A target date fund or a balanced fund held in a retirement account may be a good option for investors who want to outsource the asset allocation, diversification, and rebalancing to a professional asset manager. And we've talked at length about target date funds.
Yes.
So if you want to know more about that, you can email any of us and we'll get with you on that.
So, a side note, I'm seeing people who are young and they have chosen a target date fund that that a friend or employee recommended, and it was too conservative for their age. So, pick the fund that aligns with the year that you plan to retire to make sure your investment dollars can grow when the market is up, and when it is down, you're buying more shares with the same amount of investment money.
Agreed. But there is one exception. Investors who are also saving for a short-term need within 3 to 5 years, like a house, for example, down payment on a house or a car or something like that, should not keep funds invested in the stock market. I think this is fairly common knowledge here, but put that money in a safer place, like a money market fund or a high-yield savings account, so it'll be there when you need it.
Good. Retirees and near retirees may benefit from a less risky portfolio. We have multiple portfolios for our investors to choose from, and most of my retired clients are in a moderate portfolio, which right now is about 70% in the market and 30% in bonds. But if risk increases and we see absolute signs of a recession, we will reduce that risk because most of these people are taking distributions to live on, or they are having to take required minimum distributions or RMDs due to their age.
Yeah, and retirees generally need to keep a chunk of their portfolio in stocks, the growth engine of a portfolio, to help their investments last through their retirement years. Retirees who rely on investments for income should avoid withdrawing from their retirement accounts if they can during a recession. And it's always good to have some cash set aside for emergencies, which happens more than we realize.
I saw a client this week that is having to replace her roof, redo a pool, and more. Thankfully, she has consistently set aside cash, so is not stressed out about all of this. But it's an expensive. All these repairs are expensive right now.
And they add up.
Horrible.
Yep, right. We can never stress the importance of an emergency account.
I want to say something real quick. We've
Sure.
talked about this. It used to be, especially before COVID, that when you had an employer plan, the representatives from that company would come in and talk,
Right.
sit you guys all down in a room and say, hey, here's how this works. Here's the match your employer's going to give you. Here's your investment options. Here's how they work. Well, they don't do that anymore.
There's
No.
nothing.
And so people are left on their own and they don't have a clue. And I think what happens is, if you see somebody who's 35 years old or 40 years old and they're in a target date 2025 fund, they don't know any better. They're probably like, well, it's 2025. So let me get in this thing because it's 2025.
And they're
the
mostly in bonds.
Yeah, they're conservative and they have no idea because they don't know. Target date funds, the target date is like when you're retiring. So
Supposedly.
yeah, when you plan to retire. So if you're 30 years old, you probably want one that's out in the future 30 to 40 years. And then that way it's going to be more aggressive on the front end. We've talked about it, how they're comprised, but they're more aggressive on the front end and they dial back the aggressiveness through the years. What you don't want to do on a target date fund is pick a target date that is today, unless you're already retired.
Or 20 years prior to your retirement date.
Right.
See, we see it a lot in the military because military people have a retirement date, but they're only going to be, 45 years old?
Yeah.
Right.
And so they pick they pick that as their target date because that's when they're retiring from the military. The
Right.
education is lacking out there
It
on
is.
all of this.
They don't know any better.
So let's discuss some big inherited IRA mistakes that can shrink your windfall and, more importantly, how to avoid them. If you've inherited an individual retirement account, you may have big plans for the balance, but costly mistakes can quickly shrink the windfall. Many investors roll pre-tax 401k plans into traditional IRAs, which trigger regular income taxes on future withdrawals. The tax rules are more complicated for the heirs who inherit these IRA accounts. The average IRA balance was $127,000 during the fourth quarter of 2024, up 38% from 2014 based on a 2024 year-end report by Fidelity. So let's discuss some of the inherited IRA mistakes and how to avoid them. First, you need to understand the 10-year rule. Before the Secure Act of 2019, heirs could empty inherited IRAs over their lifetime to reduce yearly taxes. Then it was known as the Stretch IRA because beneficiaries could stretch the inheritance over their life and even leave the balance to their heirs who could do the same thing.
Yep. But since 2020, certain heirs must follow what's called the 10-year rule, and IRAs must be depleted by the 10th year after the original account owner's death. And this applies to beneficiaries who are not a spouse, minor child, disabled, or chronically ill, or certain trusts. Many heirs still don't know how the 10-year rule works, and that can actually cost them. If you don't drain the balance within 10 years, there's a 25% IRS penalty on the amount that you should have withdrawn, which could be reduced or eliminated if you fix the issue within 2 years. If you correct the problem within 2 years, the penalty will be reduced to 10%, but that's still a 10% error on the balance of your account. Inherited IRAs are a ticking tax bomb, so to speak, for pre-tax inherited IRAs. One big mistake that could be waiting until the 10th year to withdraw most of the balance, because doing that could put you into a higher tax bracket.
That's right. Likewise, some might cash out the inherited IRA soon after receiving their inheritance without weighing the tax consequence. This move could also bump you into a higher tax bracket. Of course, the size of the inheritance will make a big difference. Rather than depleting the IRA in 1 year, advisors typically run multi-year tax projections to help their heirs decide when to strategically take the funds from the inherited account. Generally, it's better to spread the withdrawals out over 10 years or take the funds if there's a period when your income is going to be lower, depending on the tax brackets.
Yep. Starting in 2025, most non-spouse heirs must take required minimum distributions, or RMDs, while emptying inherited IRAs over 10 years if the original account owner reached RMD age before death, according to final regulations released. That could surprise some beneficiaries, since the IRS previously waived penalties for missed RMDs from inherited IRAs.
Yep, and you definitely want to be mindful of this, especially if you're young and you inherit an IRA, a pre-tax IRA. A lot of times it seems like common sense to let inherited accounts just stay untouched and let them do what they're going to do and continue to grow. But if the original IRA owner had already begun taking required distributions, you must also take them for every year for 10 years. It's counterintuitive. And Sherry, you and I hate this rule. I'm sure most advisors hate this rule because you're forcing young people to liquidate an account that they could leave otherwise and go toward their own retirement.
Right.
Instead, they have to draw it down in 10 years. It's a really stupid rule.
Well, it's also bad for people who are like right at Medicare age limits, and they have to start taking this large sum of money, and it bumps them into a different tax category. And
That's
Essentially
right.
hurts them.
It's terrible.
While your custodian calculates your RMD, there are instances where it could be inaccurate. For example, there may be mistakes if you rolled over a balance in December, or there's a big age difference between you and your spouse. You really need to discuss these things with your tax advisor. Generally, you calculate the RMDs for each account by dividing your prior December 31st balance, the prior year December 31st balance, by a life expectancy factor, which is provided by the IRS. But you can take all the distribution from one of the accounts versus taking it from several different accounts. If you skip RMDs or don't withdraw enough in 2025, you could see a 25% IRS penalty on the amount that you should have withdrawn, or again, 10% if it's fixed within 2 years. You could ask for total forgiveness by sending the IRS Form 5329 with a letter of explanation.
I wonder how that's going to go.
Not well.
If you do it the first time, they say it's probably going to get forgiven. But if you do it more than once, not
Out of
going to be
luck.
lucky the
Wow.
second time.
You've been listening to Your Money, produced by Lifespan Wealth Management with your hosts, Sherry Goss, Randy Goss, and me, Jonathan Eisner. If you'd like to contribute to the show, you can email Randy at rfmoney.com with a question or topic that you'd like us to cover in a future broadcast. Our number is 478-922-8100. We have offices in Macon and Warner Robins for your convenience.
And you can find out more about us by visiting our website, retirerelax.com. Lifespan Wealth Management has been serving the Middle Georgia area for over 30 years, helping people like you achieve their investment and retirement goals. And if you're in need of a financial advisor, please contact our office at 478-922-8100.
We also offer seminars to the community at no cost. So if you are in need of a guest speaker for your church or civic organization, give us a call and together we can decide what topics you would like us to present to your group.
Again, our contact number is 478-922-8100. Now back to the show. All right. Let's talk about the Real ID, which we've covered once before, but it's becoming a headache for a lot of folks. And the looming deadline is coming up quick. And that deadline is May 7th to get the new Real ID. And it's setting off a mad scramble for U.S. travelers who have to get one. Travelers will need the Real ID upgraded driver's license, and that's the identification card or another compliant ID like a passport aboard domestic travel starting on that date. Despite years of previous delays, federal officials say travelers need to take the May 7th deadline date very serious. Local DMV offices have added hundreds of appointment slots and extended operating hours to meet the flood of Americans trying to get an upgraded ID on time. This month, the Miami-Dade County Tax Collector's Office said it discovered a network of scalpers hoarding free driver's license appointments and reselling them for a profit. That's just crazy.
Gosh.
Yeah, it is. About 1 in 5 travelers currently flying through the U.S. airports does not have a real ID or other compliant form of ID, according to the TSA officials. That's despite the requirement being in the works for decades and states issuing real IDs since the 2010s. One reason many haven't gotten one yet is that the federal government pushed the enforcement deadline back 3 times during COVID. Some travelers assumed that would happen yet again. Most states, including California and New York, have continued to issue standard licenses along with real IDs, which meant some people didn't upgrade their IDs when it came time to renew.
Good grief. There's a big problem with mixed messaging. Signs at airports urging travelers to get real ID ready, and the Department of Homeland Security's website has a real-time countdown to the May 7th date. Yet some states face overwhelming demand have taken a different approach. Don't rush the date. Real ID can wait, reads a banner on the Illinois Secretary of State's website. Illinois has added DMV Real ID Saturdays in a walk-in supercenter in Chicago to handle the influx of requests. Yet a state website reminds people that the May 7th date is not a final deadline and everyone can travel with a valid passport.
Yeah, that may be true, but here's what you really need to know. People aged 18 and older will need a real ID compliant document if they plan to fly domestically on a commercial flight, enter certain federal buildings, or enter a nuclear power plant. Licenses that are compliant have markings on the top of the card, often a gold star. If you don't have a real ID, you should bring a valid passport or other acceptable forms of ID to your domestic flight starting on May 7th. So there you go. All right. I know this may not seem like financial in nature, but I do. I see that as a motivational message as well as proof that there are still a lot of ways to make money and to leave your mark on the world. And if you watch baseball, you'll notice a new style of bat called the torpedo bat. An MIT graduate redesigned the baseball bat, and it's blowing up baseball in a good way. This new development in bat technology is perhaps the most significant development in bat technology in decades. Aaron Leonhardt's creation exploded onto the mainstream this past weekend when the New York Yankees tied a major league record by bashing 15 home runs in the first 3 games of the season. 9 of the homers came from players who adopted the torpedo bat. Now players across the league are desperately scrambling to get their hands on his creation. None of this seemed likely when he was earning his doctorate and spending several years teaching at the University of Michigan, but he left the academia to pursue a higher calling, the solution to a complex century-old physics problem with significant real-world applications. He wanted to know how to effectively hit a round ball with a wooden bat. A former Yankees player was asked about the bat and Leonhardt's creation, and he said it's probably the least impressive thing he's done in his entire life.
Yeah, this was said because the guy is an absolute genius, and he could have accomplished pretty much anything, but he loves baseball.
That's right. Leonhardt's solution moves the fat part of the bat closer to the handle rather than the end. The result is a product that better resembles a bowling pin rather than a traditional baseball bat, redistributing the weight to the area where the player most often makes contact with the ball. The idea behind the new design was to help batters make more contact at the time when the strikeouts are at an all-time high. Leonhardt eventually came to think about the bat as having what he describes as a wood budget. The goal was to use as much of that budget as possible in the ideal spot, or 6 inches below the tip, without sacrificing swing speed.
And with that theory in mind, Leonhardt dreamed up a bat that looked unlike anything the sport has ever seen. To turn his vision into reality, his concept had to comply with the MLB, with Major League Baseball's bat specifications. Rule 3.02 specifies that bats must be a smooth, round stick not more than 2.61 inches in diameter at the thickest part and not more than 42 inches in length. The last step was generating buy-in from players. And as with any idea, the adoption was slow initially, but after the Yankees' home run barrage on the opening weekend of the season, there is no longer an issue with that.
That's right. And now he is the most interesting man in baseball.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I saw something since we wrote this up earlier this week that they actually are considering banning these now, which is funny because they're abiding by the rules.
Yeah.
Why? How can they ban something that's legal?
I guess if you're hitting 9 home runs in a game or whatever we just talked about, or 15 through 3 games, they're probably like, we
Just-
got to change something.
Just ban all the other bats and let everyone have the same bat.
Well, yeah, the torpedo bat. The crowd would be a lot happier because they get a lot more home run balls.
Well, it's just like NASCAR, or any sport. If they follow the rules, but others seem to find some way around it. They tweak something. I don't know.
Let
It's
it be a
just-
level playing field.
Let it just make it a level playing field.
Here's what I love about this story, though. Whether they ban the bats or not, professional baseball's been around for over 150 years. Okay, and here we are in 2025. You think you've seen it all. They have all these complex analytics where they shift fielders based on where they think a batter's going to hit.
Right.
They even had to ban some of that a couple years ago. I don't know if you guys know that, because the analytics were winning too much. And it's like, no, guys, let's put people in their natural positions. And anyway, so we're in 2025, and this guy comes up with hey, let's just move the fat part of the bat a little lower.
Somebody who's not from baseball
Right.
comes up with this. I think this is just fantastic.
It's a washed-up college professor. He's like, I'm tired of this. Let me go change a major
Well, he
league
wasn't
sport.
washed up. He chose to wash out.
Well,
It
okay.
was-
I guess for effect, I said that. But he wasn't to your point, he wasn't a baseball guy at all.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
I think it's great.
It is cool. It's a very cool story. Hopefully they don't ban it.
I hope they don't.
selfishly speaking. But
I hope they don't. I think he's made his mark, and I think they need to let him keep his mark.
yeah,
They're
maybe
going
they'll
to
just,
want it. The players are going to want it.
They do.
Why would you not want that?
maybe they should just move the outfield fences out about 30 feet.
There
There
you
you
go.
go.
Yeah, you redesign
The whole field because of these
redesign
bats.
the entire all the
stadiums.
Yeah, all of them.
It's only 30 stadiums, Randy.
Yeah,
It's
right.
trillions of dollars.
How much could that cost? Yeah.
Right. All right. Changing gears, this was a very interesting read. To me, the gold standard would stabilize America's future. According to Steve Forbes, a guy who knows his stuff, a gold standard would restore integrity and stability to the U.S. dollar and the international monetary system, qualities that have been sorely missing for a long time. In a year of remarkable market volatility, one asset class has quietly outperformed everything else. You guessed it, that's gold. While the NASDAQ has declined over 13% year to date, it's actually a little bit higher than that now, gold has surged an impressive 27% and some change. The 40% performance gap, tells a story that many economists and policymakers are reluctant to acknowledge, that in times of economic uncertainty, investors still turn to history's most enduring store of value, gold. As the United States engages in increasingly contentious trade conflicts, the case for returning to the monetary stability of a gold standard has never been more compelling. This shift would represent not merely a return to the past, but a forward-looking solution to modern economic challenges.
Is there a case for better monetary stability than the gold standard? The largest proponents of returning to a gold standard include figures associated with the Austrian School of Economics, free market libertarians, and some supply-side economists. These advocates share a common belief that anchoring a currency in gold could curb inflation and promote long-term economic stability. The monetary stability argument is perhaps the most persuasive. Proponents argue that a gold standard, where currency is tied to a fixed amount of gold, would create a more predictable monetary system, significantly reducing the risk of inflation and currency devaluation that has plagued fiat currencies. When money is backed by the physical commodity with an intrinsic value, the ability of central banks to expand the money supply becomes naturally constrained. This connection to a tangible asset introduces a level of discipline to monetary policy that many economists believe has been missing since the Nixon administration formally abandoned the gold standard in 1971. In the 5 decades since, the purchasing power of the dollar has declined dramatically while economic volatility has increased.
Right. And the appeal of the gold standard extends beyond mere monetary stability. It represents a fundamental check on government power. By limiting the ability of governments to manipulate the money supply at will, a gold standard could potentially reduce economic instability and moderate the boom and bust cycles that have characterized modern economies. The gold standard would create a natural economic equilibrium that prevents both inflation and deflation while allowing for sustainable growth. The gold standard, where a currency's value is tied to a fixed amount of gold, has potential benefits like price stability and limited government inflation, but also drawbacks such as economic rigidity and limited money policy flexibility. The pros and cons are also often debated, and in current polar social environments, you can rest assured that this discussion will result in division and antagonism between the opposing groups or viewpoints, often resulting in lack of common ground or understanding.
So, we want to provide you with a list of the pros and cons. So, here are the pros. The gold standard can help maintain stable prices, price stability, by limiting the amount of money in circulation, as the money supply is tied to the amount of gold reserves. The gold standard can help curb inflation because the money supply can only grow as quickly as the gold supply, which is relatively stable. A gold backed currency can foster long term trust in the currency because it is tied to a tangible asset with a history of value. The gold standard can limit government interference. The governments would be limited in their ability to inflate their currencies or engage in deficit spending, potentially leading to more fiscal discipline. Only one could hope. A gold standard can also create stability in exchange rates, which can make international trade more predictable.
Yep. And some cons for the gold standard. One, it would create more economic rigidity, as Randy mentioned, in a way that might limit a country's ability to respond to economic crises or recessions, as it restricts monetary policy flexibility. What immediately comes to mind is COVID, when they sent out, when they printed a bunch of money and sent it out to people, and
Right.
that helped a lot of people in the moment. No question. It kind of also got us in the situation we're in now, no question. But had there been a gold standard, they probably would not have been able to
That's
do
right.
that. So that's what comes to mind
Good
immediately.
example.
Gold standard could limit the monetary policy options and can restrict a country's ability to adjust the money supply to stimulate the economy or combat deflation. The availability of gold is finite, which can limit the growth of the money supply and potentially lead to deflationary pressures. The price of gold can fluctuate or price volatility, or be volatile, which can create uncertainty in the value of a currency and potentially lead to instability. The gold standard can create an economic dependence on gold production, which can be problematic if a country does not have abundant gold reserves. By limiting the ability to expand the money supply, a gold standard can exacerbate economic downturns and make it harder to recover from recessions. And this is the part I said about the COVID
Right.
coming to mind.
Well, gold has been an essential component in the financial reserves of nations for centuries, and its appeal is showing no sign of diminishing, with central banks set to be purchasers of gold once again this year. Indeed, central banks now hold more than 3,500 metric tons of the metal, about 1/5 of all the gold that has ever been mined. But what about? What is it about gold that makes it such a key asset for so long? One of gold's primary roles for central banks is to diversify their reserves. The bank is also responsible for their nation's currency, but these can also be subject to swings in the value depending on the perceived strength or weakness of their underlying economy. At times of need, the banks may be forced to print more money since interest rates, the traditional lever of monetary control, have been stuck near zero for over a decade. The increase in the money supply may be necessary to stave off economic turmoil, but the cost of devaluing the currency. Gold, by contrast, is finite, physical commodity whose supply can't easily be added to. As such, it is a natural hedge against inflation.
Gold carries no credit or counterparty risks. It just serves as a source of trust in a country and in all economic environments, making it one of the most crucial reserve assets worldwide alongside government bonds. Gold's inverse relationship with the US dollar, another major reserve asset, is an added element to its appeal. When the dollar dips in value, gold typically rises, enabling central banks to protect their reserves at times of market volatility. The profile of the most active central banks has changed, with the traditional economic powerhouses such as the US, Germany, France, and Italy no longer buying more gold, but instead retaining the substantial holdings they already have. The U.S. possesses the most gold with over 8,100 tons, which equates to almost 78% of its total foreign reserves. That's more than double Germany's holdings of more than 3,300 tons, which makes it second on the list and equates to about 74% of its reserves.
Yep. And now other countries like Russia, China, Turkey, and India have stepped into their places as purchasers of gold. Yet, despite the four countries buying substantial quantities of gold over the last decade or so, they still lag behind their Western counterparts, with gold representing only 22% of Russia's reserves, while China's holdings of just under 2,000 tons represents only 3%. More recently, European Union members Poland and Hungary have been making regular additions to their holdings. A statement issued by Hungary's central bank at the time of its March purchase, which tripled its total gold holdings to 94.5 tons, gave an insight into the asset's modern-day relevance as well as its enduring appeal. It said that managing new risks arising from the coronavirus pandemic played a key role in the bank's decision. while the appearance of a global spike in government debts or inflation concerns further increase the importance of a gold in national strategy as a safe haven asset and as a store of value. So, while the origin of the central banks buying gold may have changed over the years, the reasons for holding the asset have changed very little.
So we encourage you to do a deeper dive into the topics that affect your money. And don't forget you have access to several periodicals for free on our website. Go to retirerelax.com, other resources at the top of the page, and then useful links. A lot of good stuff there.
Yep.
Next up, a new Virginia law aimed at cracking down on reckless driving will require some convicted speeders to install intelligent speed assistance or ISA technology in their vehicles. This is interesting we have this in here because Randy and I, both of us, this week saw horrific wrecks.
Yep.
One of mine was right down south of our office on Bass Road.
And mine was over on Martin Luther King on the way to work.
I mean, there was a guy laying in the middle of the road and 3 cars literally destroyed. And it's a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit.
And the one I saw was a head-on collision, and the SUV literally had gone airborne, flipped over, and was back on his wheels when I got there. But the driver of the car was dead, still inside the car. It was terrible.
That
So-
guy died?
Yeah, and
Man.
it was. There's no way either one of those cars. Well, at least the one of the cars had to be traveling well over the speed limit.
But I don't see how on Bass Road how that even happened. I was driving and I could not believe my eyes when I saw how destroyed the cars were and a guy laying in the middle of the street.
Right.
Man.
I mean, anyways, so a new Virginia law, start over since I got distracted there. A new Virginia law aimed at cracking down on reckless driving will require some convicted speeders to install intelligent speed assistance or ISA technology in their vehicles. The legislature signed this into law under House Bill 2096. This law applies to drivers convicted of reckless driving at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. The technology uses GPS and speed limit databases or cameras that can detect road signs to either alert drivers when they're speeding or actively limit the vehicle's speed. For those who think Big Brother is overstepping, think about all the crazy drivers we see on the roads now. The U.S. sees approximately 6 million car accidents each year. That breaks down to approximately 15,000 accidents a day.
Yeah, and there are about 37,000 crash fatalities each year, or 101 deaths per day. An additional 2.3 million suffer injuries or disabilities annually, 6,438 per day. And according to the NTSA, almost 1/3 of traffic fatalities are related to speed-related crashes. So, of that 101 deaths per day, approximately 33 lives are lost to crashes related to speed. And if you're running the numbers in your head, that totals a little more than 12,000 deaths per year.
And maybe there's a better way to look at this. The law offers ISA as an alternative to license suspension or jail time for repeat traffic offenders who have accumulated enough points. Under the program, drivers would be barred from operating any vehicle not equipped with ISA and will be required to pay for installation themselves. The law applies only to private passenger vehicles, not commercial ones, but it reflects growing national momentum for ISA. New York City, for example, has reported a 64% drop in high-speed driving in areas where ISA-equipped fleet vehicles are in use. Other cities, including Ventura County, California, Somerville, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C., have already launched pilot programs.
Yeah, with speed involved in nearly 30% of all U.S. traffic fatalities, safety groups like the Insurance Institute for Safety and Families for Safe Streets are calling for broader adoption of the tech, including federal mandates. In January, the National, or NTSB, recommended ISA be required in all new vehicles, either as a passive alert system or one that actively limits speed.
Anyone who has ever had a child has one day had to trust the kid with the keys to go solo out into the streets and pray they come home unscathed. It is scary no matter how well trained you believe they are once they get out on their own. They will not make the best decisions. It's a fact. And even if they do, and they are faced with careless and even reckless drivers that we see on the road, they may not know how to react. So, Jonathan, you have a new driver in your house.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of conversations have you had with your son about all this stuff?
Well, he's still only 15, so he's not out on his own just yet. Thank goodness, we're very close. But he's overall a pretty good driver. But his problem is he takes driving too literally. He has no finesse, and maybe that's normal for 15-year-old males. I don't know. For example, if the speed limit sign is 45 miles an hour, he's going to get to 45 miles an hour quickly, regardless of what actually is going on around him.
Right.
And I'll say, Gabriel, what are you doing? He's like, Dad, the speed limit's 45. I say, what about that car pulling out over there? What about that person walking their dog? Well, I mean, Gabriel, you have to be aware of your surroundings. And to that point, probably most wrecks for responsible drivers are because of the other person,
Right.
right? It's not the driver's fault if they're responsible and aware of their surroundings. So, Jerry, to answer your question, we're telling him, Gabriel, you have to be aware if somebody pulls in front of you, if they're on their phone while they're driving and they're driving crazy.
Yep.
If they stop abruptly at a green light because they don't know. You just have to be aware because a wreck is probably not going to be your fault.
And adding to what you're saying, when I was looking at these NTSA statistics, I also read that people who are going below the speed limit, like cars who we see all the time driving the fast lane at below the speed limit,
Yeah,
they are attributed to a lot of deaths
I
too.
believe that.
Horribly dangerous. You
Well-
can't get them to move over.
And that's where the aggressive drivers are.
That's right.
And they're aggressive mentally, if nothing else. So then they're pulling stunts to try to get
Right.
around this person who shouldn't be in that lane. So anyway, we're just trying to teach him to have awareness
Yep.
as he approaches 16.
Good.
I think this ISA technology is needed. In my opinion, movies like The Fast and the Furious, and there are others, have glorified illegal street racing. And right here in Macon, I am aware of racing that takes place, or at least it was happening out on I-16 late at night. And a few years back, Sherry and I were traveling to Charlotte, North Carolina to a meeting, and we were in heavy traffic in Columbia, South Carolina. And all of a sudden, I can only describe what sounded a sound that you would only hear on a NASCAR track. And two cars with the tags removed were swerving in and out of traffic. And one literally forced us to brake because he was taking our lane, whether we liked it or not. And I've come to believe that drivers like this need to have some sort of monitoring system in their car as a penalty.
Yep.
And they're a danger to societies and our families on the road. So,
That was so terrifying. I was screaming
yes,
because
you
he
were.
came up right behind us like he was on our bumper. Then he shoved his way around us and made all the cars move, and then shoved his way right in front of us, between us and the car in front. I mean, I've never been through anything like that in my life, and it was all intentional. They were racing
They were racing.
on the freeway and weaving in and out of traffic, and I couldn't take a picture.
And-
I mean, there was no
and-
way to catch him because
And
they
that
didn't
was
have
the
a
event.
tag.
And that was the event that made us put a camera in our car.
Right. Anywho,
Anyway, your credit report knows when you buy stuff with the buy now, pay later option. Affirm, one of the largest buy now, pay later lenders, on Tuesday will begin furnishing all new loans to Experian, similar to how the mortgage or a car loan shows up on your credit card report. So far, the change to this fast-growing form of consumer debt only applies to Affirm loans and Experian credit reports, but other lenders and credit bureaus may soon follow suit. TransUnion, for example, has started collecting data from two buy now, pay later, or BNPL providers, it says, and is working to make this information available to consumers and lenders soon, once it has a more complete data set. Affirm offers short-term, interest-free loans at checkout that allows you to buy something and pay for it in 4 installments over 6 weeks. Unlike credit cards, unlike credit card debt, these pay-in-4 loans typically haven't shown up on credit card reports. Now, all new Affirm loans, whether paid on time or late, will appear on credit card files. Previously, Affirm only reported longer-term, interest-bearing loans to the credit bureaus.
it's about time they're doing this. So adding these accounts to reports won't immediately have an impact on credit scores, since traditional scoring models haven't yet been updated to include this type of debt, but they may soon, according to Experian. A joint study from FICO and Affirm in February found that 85% of buy now, pay later users saw score changes of fewer than 10 points by adding the account to the credit report under a simulated model. The context, buy now, pay later loans have been a multi-billion-dollar blind spot in the credit reporting system. Use skyrocketed during the pandemic as more retailers added the installment plans at checkouts. In 2022 alone, Americans opened more than 277 million of these loans, worth $34 billion, up from 180 million and 24 billion the year before, according to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, under previous leadership, had growing concerns about loan stacking, where consumers juggle multiple buy now, pay later loans at once. In 2022, 63% of users had more than one loan at a time. 33% had loans across multiple providers. This is good that this is happening because this is out of control.
Yep, and because most buy now, pay later loans haven't been reported to credit bureaus, lenders have had a limited visibility into how much debt borrowers were actually carrying. That means an auto lender underwriting a $20,000 car loan might not know if their customer already had recently financed a new designer belt. The shift is designed to close the gap and could pave the way for other buy now, pay later firms and bureaus that do the same. I think that's it. I think we're out of time, right, guys?
Got about 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, so I'm just putting this out there into the universe so that we remember to talk about it next week. My son totaled his car recently, which was fun, and I'm going to talk next week and tell people about agencies that buy destroyed vehicles for more than you think they might be worth.
That'll be great information.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Thanks
Great.
for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Your Money, produced by Lifespan Wealth Management. As financial advisors, the main thing we do is provide retirement planning advice and manage our clients' investment accounts. If you're looking for an investment advisor, call our office at 478-922-8100 to set up your complimentary consultation. You can learn more about our services by visiting our website at retirerelax.com.
And if you'd like to contribute to the show, you can email me, randy@rfmoney.com, with a question or a topic that you would like for us to cover in a future broadcast. And we look forward to connecting with you next week. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Securities and investment advisory services offered through Osaic Wealth Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. Osaic Wealth is separately owned, and other entities and or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Osaic Wealth.